These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today on Market Journal. I'm Bryce Duskett. The theme of the week is getting back in the field. A lot of planters like the one behind me currently parked in the shed. Certainly a lot of rain in areas fell across portions of central and eastern Nebraska. We'll get an update on planting progress coming up here in a few moments. Also on this week's show, we'll talk about the cattle markets with Mike Briggs with Briggs Feed Yard. Also discuss highly pathogenic avian influenza when it comes to dairy cattle and some new restrictions to help slow the spread of that virus. Weatherman Eric Hunt is also standing by with an update, but first let's head out and into the field just to the west of Wahoo, Nebraska. Susan Littlefield is joining us now. And Susan, the grower you're with, is he able to get back in the fields following that rain over the weekend?
Yeah, Bryce, thanks so much. We are west of Wahoo. Actually, we're outside of the town of Rising City, between Rising City and Surprise, where Mother Nature has for the last couple of years not given anybody any rain. And then she opened up the spigot. And as you can see behind me, we have got a lot of rain, a lot of moisture that is taking place, which unfortunately has caused for a delay in the planting. So we're bringing in farmer Kevin Siffring. And Kevin, let's talk about the field behind us. When did you first plant this?
This was planted last Wednesday.
Okay, so just about a week ago in that sense. What did you plant?
Corn.
So
this is corn for silage here.
Okay, so looking at it now, underwater once again, let's talk about this field and the issues you have with this one.
It's always low. If you, I always tell my wife, I say if you plant everything fence to fence and get nothing rounded out, it's not good for the dry land. So it's actually in the long run, I'll take these spots, replanting them, or once or twice, or give up eventually. So I'll take the rain anytime. So because you never know when you're not going to get it, as we all know.
Exactly. We just kind of went through that. 4 years of not a lot of rain, and you've got some dry land. So I'm sure this moisture that you're seeing right now for these fields is very welcome. Yeah,
it was beautiful. I was planting some dry land yesterday. It was so nice having moisture everywhere. So yeah, very, very nice to have the rain.
Now I think what's unique about this field as well is you talked about gravity, and it is a low spot, but your dad farm's right next to you, and so the water kind of flows on its own into a holding area that doesn't soak into the ground.
Yeah, it just fills up. You could tell when it rained that we had like 250 out of the last rain, and you could tell that it took a lot. For swamp, and a lot of times it has enough in it, ahead of time that it doesn't take much. But it drank a lot, and so that's how dry we are here. That's how dry we are. It took so much water. So, and now it's obviously hitting its point where it's filling that underneath it up.
Which is nice to have that reservoir kind of filled up because, like you said, you don't know what the next weather.
Exactly.
So as you look at the fields and when you were starting to plant initially, were you planting some in the dust to start out this spring year?
Oh yes, definitely. There was moisture underneath, but on top, it was very dusty out here. So yeah, and then and even yesterday there was dust even before we had that little sprinkle yesterday. Then there was no dust after that, but yeah, it was definitely dry on top, but we still had some underneath. So because we're way ahead of last year. So
I was just gonna.
Last year was so dusty the whole time.
I was going to ask, what was your deficit going in? Do you know, when you talked to your agronomists and your crop guys, what were they saying fall at harvest, what this was like?
We dug some post holes there last week, and it was clear down. It was very powdery for clay. So yeah, that's what I'm going by. It was definitely a deficit. So I don't know what it was, but technically, but I don't know what it was, but it was definitely dry.
The dust definitely can tell you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as you look at this, how long will it take for this field to be dry enough that you can go in and do a replant?
That probably will be, depending on what we get, but now. for rain, but yeah, that may not get back in again. So if it will, it'll be super late, so it may go back to beans. So that's what I usually do if it, floods out. The spot that is, just put beans in there. So because obviously the fertilizer's gone.
Oh yeah, very much so. So you're gonna have to do a reapplication as well then?
No, just put beans in it and then don't have to worry about it putting any more fertilizer into it.
So some might say, well, Kevin, if this floods out, why even plant in the first place?
Because farmers are eternal optimists. At least I am. So people ask me that, why do I plant any of my low spots? I'm like, some years that's the best stuff. Like last year, the low ground was way better than anything up high, just because it had that reserve underneath. So just plant it. You don't want it to be weeds, so.
Very true. Well, we wish you the best in this year's growing season, and thanks for joining us and sharing your swamp field with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Susan. We appreciate that in the field update. Up next, let's head over to the cattle side of the ag industry. And there's a term out there called Heifer Harmony used when heifers are not retained for breeding purposes and instead sent to a feedlot. If you find yourself in that situation, there's some specific things you want to have on your mind and consider for this time of the year. Bill Dodd is standing by with this story. Bill?
Since 2020, the United States cow-calf population has declined roughly 10%. That means fewer heifers are being retained within cow-calf operations and making their way to feedlot operations. With that in mind, there are some steps feedlot operators can take to ensure the biggest bang for their buck when it comes to feeding and caring for these new arrivals.
Starting in January, we were seeing heifer feedlot numbers, total cattle on feed percent, at around 39.7 to 40% rate. And that number was extremely high, where we see our normal heifer in a feedlot rate at around 37%. However, we are getting an inkling right now that maybe there is a little bit more heifer retention into those cow-calf operations or used for breeding, as we have seen a decline in the number of heifers in the feedlot down to about 38.5% of total cattle on feed. And so this is positive for us in terms of rebuilding the cow herd, but also we're seeing historically high prices in both feeder calf and fat cattle pricing, where we actually last week saw an inverted steer to heifer pricing ratio for dressed cattle. And we don't ever normally see that. Steers are always much higher than heifers in terms of live fat cattle prices and dressed beef, but we did see this.
A major factor to take into account when receiving new heifers in a feedlot operation is potential pregnancy. In fact, roughly 2 to 15% of new heifers will arrive on a feedlot already pregnant. With that in mind, there are a few options when it comes to checking for and handling a pregnant heifer.
And so one of our best standard operating procedures that we can recommend is palpating those cattle upon arrival. So that can be by rectal palpation or by blood test, etc. Getting your vet out there to, assist you in that procedure and make sure that those heifers are not pregnant upon arriving into the feed yard. Another factor of that is if that animal is pregnant in the feed yard, now what do you do with that heifer, right? Do you remove her from the feeding system altogether and maybe sell her as a bred animal, or are you going to deal with that pregnancy in terms of utilizing an abortifacient? And that's always a conversation that we encourage you to have with your veterinarian because abortifacient and their use are based largely on age of the heifer and weight of that heifer in the feed yard. One thing is that some guys will maybe consider just feeding that heifer out. Maybe she's not going to calve before she makes her way to the packing plant. We don't highly recommend that because overall the heifers that are bred are just not going to perform the same as females in the feed yard that are, obviously intact but without calf.
Mixing pens with heifers and steers is something that should also be avoided. When taking heifers into a feedlot operation, keeping them separate from the steer population is a necessary step for several reasons. However, the type of nutrition needed by steers will differ greatly from the needs of the heifers.
So mixed pens, I guess our number one challenge is in order to suppress estrus in our heifer population in the feed yard, we use a type A medicated feed called melangestrol acetate, fed at a pretty low dose rate in the feed yard sector, but we do feed it to the majority of the heifer population in feed yards because it does suppress estrus. And, a lot of people think that we're trying to suppress estrus and, not allow that heifer to get bred, etc. But really the value is that the feed conversion and overall hot carcass weight advantage or rate of gain advantage is there when we feed MGA. And so some historical data on that, we see on average an increase of about 19 pounds of hot carcass weight by feeding MGA to heifers.
With packers seemingly trying to get more beef on the rails,
Feeding heifers is quite advantageous considering the current prices of fat cattle. However, success will hinge on good management strategies and the standard operating procedures within the feedlot operation itself. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
All right, thank you very much for that story, Bill. We appreciate it. If you'd like some additional resources on this topic, go ahead and bookmark the website beef.unl.edu. Speaking of feedlots, we're standing at a feedlot now. We're at Briggs Feed Yard, just near Seward, Nebraska. Mike Briggs is joining us as we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we got all kinds of topics today.
Lots of news impacted the cattle markets, but let's just size up live and feeder cattle as you see it.
Well, the last time we talked, I was cautiously optimistic, and the reason I say cautiously, this market, or the CBOT, the board has been kind of out of step all along. We started our rally way too early this year. Then we kind of crashed in what would typically be a good time. And now we have all kinds of outside influences. We got 2 wars going on, and now they're testing for bird flu in hamburger and trying to see if they can find it. And then they're even going so far as they're injecting it into hamburger, seeing how hot you got to get the meat to kill it. So, but it's one of these deals. If you're testing for it, eventually you'll find it. And I just hope that doesn't just completely wreck our market and scare our consumer. You'll be able to kill the virus with some amount of heat, so I'm really not worried about it. But it's like, gosh, are you just trying to tip this thing over with all the stuff that's going on? It's really frustrating to me as a producer.
All right, I want to get more on your thoughts coming up here in a second. You said the futures market is kind of out of step here. Is the cash side of things, is that more in step with how you see things?
Yeah, but cash needs to lead this. If this market's any good, cash has got to lead, not the board. It's never good when the board leads. That gets us in all kinds of trouble. If you're a hedger right now, you're running around with a big grin on your face because we're probably going to trade a 9, 10, maybe even an $11 or $12 basis this week. Depends on how we do, but this is a great time of year for a hedger. I think cash is going to remain strong. I would like to think if the outside influences don't bite us in the behind, I would think we're going to keep going up right into Memorial Day, which is our best beef holiday, and maybe a few weeks after that.
To that point, feedlot full at this point?
Feedlot's pretty full. I was kind of loaded up for April, May, June, so I'm pretty full, but they're going to start going out, and it'll be interesting to see if anything comes back in.
All right, you brought up highly pathogenic avian influenza. It's been confirmed in several dairy herds, I think 9 different states at this point. Obviously some questions about how long has this truly been around. They're just detecting it at this point. I've not heard any news of it being confirmed in beef, but dairy cattle, as if when they're cold, do end up in the beef supply chain.
Yes.
How big of a concern is this to you?
It's a concern if it is an actual true human health issue. If it's in the meat and you cook it just like you got to cook it for E. coli, no change, no big deal, who cares? I know that everybody's really concerned that avian flu is eventually going to flip into the human population. That's all above my pay grade, but I just really don't think it's going to bother out here. It shouldn't bother us, so hopefully it won't.
You have to imagine on the consumer side, as we do go into the big grilling holiday, as we often talk about, consumer perception, though, is going to be a concern.
Always is, because what is perceived is true. So hopefully it can become a non-issue, and our wonderful media people actually portray it as a non-issue, but everybody likes to be salacious, so who knows?
All right, news this past week, there was a finalization of rules when it comes to traceability. There was rules already in place when it comes to interstate travel of certain cattle. I believe about 11% impacted by this, but the switch was going to electronic identification. You and I have talked a bit about that in the past. Let's remind our viewers, though, where you stand on it.
I've always been a proponent of identification because if we have an animal health issue, and we don't have any traceability, we can't find it, we can't stop it, we can't squash it. That's the thing I'm worried about. Somebody has an outbreak of something that we find down the line, God forbid in the meat supply, and try to trace that back, it's virtually impossible. And so that's why I like it. A lot of the guys, especially the ranchers, are like, oh, the government's just trying to see how many cows I have. I don't care. So but I think we need, as an industry, I think it's really important that we have traceability, because it will allow us to improve our product over time just by data itself. But also, like I said, in case there's an animal health issue, we can squash it. And that's really important.
All right, back getting to the cattle market side of this. What seasonal trends are you watching at this point? What should we be aware of?
Well, as you pointed out, it's grilling season. So the wind needs to quit blowing 400 miles an hour a day. But hopefully people start dragging their grills out. But, you know, this economy's tough. Consumers are just getting quashed at every angle. Doesn't matter if it's gasoline, food. Food is horrible. Even our grocery bill is horrible. And you just kind of wonder how people are making it by. So to go out there and pay the prices that are in the retail store right now is really concerning to me. The retailer has a very large margin that he acquired in the COVID years. Doesn't want to give it up. Now the good thing for him then is he's got a lot of margin to have sales, and hopefully he'll bring these prices down and get some demand going, and we can get this cash market going again.
Are you more bullish or bearish then on the cattle markets right now?
Still cautiously optimistic. There's so many outside forces that we have no control over. That always makes me concerned. But typically this is the time of year and the fundamentals are in our favor. It should be great.
We can always count on Mike for giving us his blunt thoughts on the cattle markets, and we appreciate him joining us on the broadcast. Coming up next week, Doug Simon will be joining us as we discuss the latest happenings in the grain markets. As always, we invite your questions here on Market Journal, so go ahead and email those in by the middle of the week to get it in time for Doug. Farm accidents are true tragedies, and a fair amount of farm-related injuries and deaths each year come from operation of ATVs and UTVs. That's why driving safely and following a few safety tips, like avoiding overloading the vehicle, wearing personal protective equipment, knowing the law, and maintaining the equipment are crucial steps to a safe operation. You can learn more about operating these vehicles safely in the latest issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Up next, let's check in with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Eric Hunt. Eric, I mentioned it, a lot of planters still sitting in the shed like the one behind us here on the broadcast because of the rain that's fallen over the past several days at this point. As we look to the week ahead, will we have some good days for planting progress?
Thanks, Bryce. I'm seeing a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel with regards to getting back out and planting, but I think the tractors will be stuck in the shed for just a little bit longer. One of the responsible culprits for keeping the tractors in the shed a bit longer is this trough moving into the high plains. Early this part of this next week, as that low pressure system moves up into South Dakota, out ahead of it, we'll be in the warm, moist sector here across the eastern half of the state. The Storm Prediction Center here on Thursday has already put a good portion of the state in the slight risk category for severe storms on Monday afternoon. So again, I think we're going to pay very close attention in the eastern half of the state on Monday afternoon and Monday evening for large hail, damaging winds, and possibly some more tornadoes, which again, after this past Friday, we don't need any more of those. In addition to that, we're definitely looking at some pretty good chances of half-inch to inch of rain across the eastern half of the state. Potentially a little bit more than what's being predicted here by the WPC across the northern part of the Panhandle as well. Also, very welcome rains across the northern high plains into the southern Canadian prairies, which would be very welcome for reducing some long-standing drought conditions up in that area and hopefully reducing some wildfire chances up there this summer. In terms of precipitation, the European ensemble shows basically almost a guarantee of getting an inch of rain across most of the eastern half of Nebraska and some chance of getting that much moisture across the western portion of the state as well. In terms of temperatures next week, again, it will be much warmer the eastern side of the U.S. and pretty cool across the western U.S. will be dominated by troughing in the next week. Basically, the further west you go in Nebraska, the cooler the temperatures will be for most of this next week. The CPC is showing that it's likely to remain cooler than average across a lot of the high plains region through getting into the middle of the month. And if we take a look at that, kind of the same time period on the European model, they were actually showing a little bit more broad area of cooler temperatures. So again, this may be a little bit overdone, but I definitely think we are looking at it being a little bit cooler than average during the period of May 8th to the 14th. The CPC is showing it being wetter than average across the good portion of the country as we head into the middle of the month. But the good news, though, is the European model is showing a little bit maybe more normal to slightly drier than average conditions across most of Nebraska as we move into the May 8th to 14th time period. That does not mean any rain at all, but it does mean that maybe we are going to get into the end of the very active period, and maybe we'll start having some longer breaks in between precipitation, which we could absolutely use so people can get back out in the field. Speaking of precipitation, we've had a lot of rain across most of the state here in the last week. A few exceptions, parts of south central Nebraska and, of course, parts of the northern western panhandle under a couple inches. But big winter has been Broken Bow down toward Lexington with over 5 inches of rain in some spots. This has definitely helped soil moisture. Again, this is probably about the best in terms of where we've been in the state in early May in quite a few years. This is definitely good news. And in terms of the drought monitor, we did see quite a bit of improvement across southwestern Nebraska, portions of central Nebraska, and some elimination of D0 and D1 across portions of northeastern Nebraska as well. Soil temperatures, generally speaking, are in the mid to upper 50s to low 60s. And we have a lot of tornado reports across eastern Nebraska and central Nebraska this past Friday. And I just want to point out that we have a new webinar series coming up. Thanks. Back to you, Bryce.
All right, we'll keep a close eye on that weather situation. Thank you, Eric. Up next, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has released some new guidance to stop the spread of highly pathogenic avian influenza in dairy cattle. You heard me ask Mike about that topic just a little bit ago. For more on these developments, we turn now to Market Journal's Mike Straub.
As of April 1st, 2024, NDA is requiring a permit for any female dairy cattle entering Nebraska. It is recommended to avoid animal movement. However, if animal movement is deemed necessary, consult with your herd veterinarian and/or the NDA to assure all requirements are being met.
So the local producers should be aware of it because the requirements are for any interstate movement of lactating dairy cattle to have a negative H5N1 test within 7 days before they're allowed to move interstate. So it's a milk sample, and those are performed by Nuln laboratories, of which in Nebraska, the Nebraska Veterinary Diagnostic Center is a Nuln lab. So milk samples are collected from cows, individually from cows, and then those are sent to the lab and tested for the virus, and then the results are given back to the producer or submitting veterinarian.
In late February and early March of 2024, dairy cattle in Texas were showing signs of decreased milk production. In late March, the National Veterinary Service Laboratory in Iowa confirmed H5N1 in a milk sample of an affected cow. The virus has been diagnosed on 28 premises across 8 states. There are no confirmed cases in Nebraska.
Industry-wide, I think personally, it can be probably be fairly minimal, but it does on an individual cow basis for those that are affected can decrease their production of milk in an individual cow. On an individual cow basis, it could be substantial, but there's simply it's not as widespread that I would worry as an industry-wide impact. It certainly could change as it progresses, but no confirmed cases in Nebraska as of today. It goes back to the old adage of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So the main focus should really be keeping the virus within our best abilities off of our individual farms. So that goes back to biosecurity of the farm itself. There's lots of good resources out there for farm biosecurity. We have a Big Red biosecurity website that we are expanding now to include dairy cattle, and there's some good information there on what producers can do for their own farms to assess their biosecurity, measures they may be able to take to enhance their biosecurity on their own place, and again, keep the virus ideally off their own farm.
With no cases of H5N1 in Nebraska cattle, the focus now should be prevention by focusing on biosecurity within the farm. There are several resources to reference when trying to navigate best biosecurity practices.
The biggest one by far is an unexplained or otherwise unexplained drop in milk production. Certainly sick cattle can decrease milk production, so if there are other ailments that would be obvious, that would not be the case. But an unexplained drop in milk production in an individual cow would certainly be the most consistent finding. Some of these cows will present with a fever, can be lethargic as well, can go off feed, but the main one to be on the lookout for is a drop in milk production. I would encourage people to work closely with their normal herd veterinarian regarding testing any suspected animals that they see the clinical signs like I just mentioned, and then work with them for further steps on their own farm. Our dairy extension website, dairy.unl.edu, we've tried to update that as frequently as we can with new information. So new information is constantly coming out, and I would encourage any interested producers or Nebraskans to go to that website, the dairy extension website, to come up to be aware of new information as it becomes available.
Closely monitor cows for the clinical signs of H5N1, particularly an unexplained sudden drop in milk production. Farm biosecurity is often site-specific. While there are general principles all farms can follow, these principles need to be applied in context with the farm in question. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
If you'd like to learn more on this topic, head on over to the Market Journal website. You see at the bottom of your screen now. That's where we'll post some additional resources. Before we go, one final story to share with you. Nebraska Governor Jim Pillen, he went horseback for several rides around the governor's mansion to start the week. He did so because the University of Nebraska-Lincoln is hosting a rodeo in Lincoln this week. Alex Mackovika is standing by with this story.
That Rodeo Week proclamation helps set the stage ahead of the annual Nebraska Cornhusker College Rodeo that takes place May 3rd and 4th at the Sandhills Global Event Center in Lincoln.
We've got extraordinary young people competing in rodeo, so it's a great celebration of young people. For fun rodeo, you know, we don't take enough time to celebrate and brag in Nebraska. Rodeo is a great celebration of agriculture, especially when we take a look at livestock and cattle and that roll with horses and rodeo and cowboys and roping and all the skills. So it's a great celebration, and we just got extraordinary young people here.
The governor was joined by members of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln rodeo team. He said Rodeo Week is a great chance also to celebrate these student athletes.
So these are kids that are virtually all from across Nebraska. They're great. They care about each other deeply. They work their horses. They spend tons of time competing, and they just got back in Spearfish for 5 days, and now they have a big event this weekend at the Sandhills Global, and so excited about. Two on the team really did well, and they're also so excited for their teammates. They're the hearts of Nebraska.
Of course, I know you're asking this burning question: which horse did the governor get to ride?
I got on Jibba, and Jibba's a really, really good horse and did really well up in Spearfish, and he was really good to me.
The Cornhusker College Rodeo will bring more than a dozen teams and hundreds of fans to the capital city. This weekend's rodeo is the final rodeo of the regular season for athletes in the Great Plains region, meaning that this rodeo is the last chance for many athletes to qualify for the College National Finals Rodeo.
Very proud of this group. We've had a lot of growing experiences, improving our skills and abilities, but I'm proud of breakaway roper barrel racer giving themselves a shot to qualify for the college finals.
Reporting in Lincoln, I'm Alex Mackovika.
Governor looks pretty comfortable up there on a horse. Appreciate you bringing us that story, Alex. Now, if you'd like to watch the UNL Rodeo and catch up with any of our previous Market Journal episodes, I want to encourage you to make sure you have Acres TV downloaded to your phone or your smart TV. You can also watch online at watchacrestv.com. Again, that's where we'll be streaming the UNL Rodeo this week. We appreciate you joining us on this week's broadcast of Market Journal. Until next time, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.